She once dreamed of becoming a princess, never a figure that would terrify millions. Yet fate had other plans. In 1973, at only 14 years old, Linda Blair appeared on the big screen and unknowingly gave birth to one of the most horrifying moments in cinematic history through The Exorcist. The reaction was immediate and intense. Audiences fainted in theaters, some fled before the film even ended, and countless others lay awake for nights, haunted by what they had seen. Overnight, the life of a quiet teenage girl from Connecticut, who had never truly sought fame, was transformed forever. Born as Linda Denise Blair on January 22, 1959, in St. Louis, Missouri, her early life seemed far removed from the darkness she would later portray. Her father, James, was a former Navy test pilot turned executive recruiter, while her mother, Eleanor, worked in real estate. At just 2 years old, Linda's family relocated to Westport, Connecticut, a peaceful and affluent town just outside New York City. It was there, in this seemingly ordinary setting, that her extraordinary journey began. From an early age, Linda was already stepping into the spotlight. By 5, she had secured her first modeling job. By 6, she was appearing in major print advertisements, including the New York Times, and quickly became a recognizable face in catalogs for Macy's, Sears, and J.C. Penney. Alongside this budding career, she developed an unexpected passion for horseback riding, a pursuit she approached with dedication and discipline far beyond her years. At the time, everything about her life seemed typical of a photogenic child in the 1960s, when modeling was often seen as nothing more than a harmless extracurricular activity. But what began as simple photo shoots quietly set the stage for something far greater, and far more unsettling. No one could have foreseen that this young girl's path would lead her into a role that would captivate the world, redefine horror, and cast a long, complicated shadow over her life. By 1968, at only 9 years old, Linda Blair had already taken a decisive step beyond modeling and into the world of television, securing a regular role on the CBS daytime soap Hidden Faces. Though the show lasted just a year, ending in 1969, it offered her something far more valuable than longevity: real on-screen experience at an age when most children were still focused on schoolwork. Not long after, she began edging into film, making her theatrical debut in The Way We Live Now, 1970, followed by a brief appearance in the comedy The Sporting Club. Each role was small, but together they quietly built a foundation for something much bigger. Despite these early steps into acting, Linda's life in Westport at age 12 still carried the rhythm of normalcy. She attended school like any other child, balanced her growing acting opportunities, and remained deeply committed to horseback riding, a passion she pursued with genuine discipline. At home, she shared a stable, supportive environment with her brother Jimmy and her sister Debbie. To anyone looking in from the outside, there was little to suggest that her life was anything other than steady and grounded. Nothing at that point hinted at the upheaval waiting just around the corner. Then came 1972. A turning point that would alter everything. A casting call was announced for a film titled The Exorcist, directed by the intensely meticulous William Friedkin. Fresh off his Academy Award win for The French Connection, Friedkin was now preparing to bring to life the best-selling novel by William Peter Blatty, a dark and deeply unsettling story about a young girl overtaken by a demonic force. What seemed like just another audition at the time would soon become the gateway to a role that would shock the world and change Linda Blair's life forever. The role of Regan McNeil was unlike anything most child actors could handle, demanding a fragile balance between innocence and pure terror, shifting from one extreme to the other in a heartbeat without ever feeling forced. For William Friedkin, finding the right face for The Exorcist became an exhausting pursuit. He auditioned nearly 600 girls, searching for someone who could embody both vulnerability and something far darker. Months passed with no success, and frustration began to set in. At one point, he even considered abandoning the idea of casting a younger child altogether, turning instead to older teenage actresses. And then, unexpectedly, everything shifted. A 13-year-old girl, Linda Blair, walked in without an appointment, unknowingly stepping into the moment that would define her life. Friedkin would later explain that talent alone wasn't enough for this role. He needed someone who not only could perform under pressure but also seemed mentally resilient enough to endure the storm that might follow the film's release. In Linda, he believed he had found exactly that rare combination. And in terms of performance, he was right. She delivered something unforgettable. But when it came to the emotional and psychological aftermath, the reality would prove far more complicated than he had anticipated. Still, that single audition sealed her fate. Linda Blair became Reagan. Filming began in 1972, and what unfolded behind the scenes was just as intense as what audiences would later witness on screen. The set of The Exorcist was charged with tension, driven by Friedkin's relentless pursuit of authenticity. His methods were extreme, even by Hollywood standards. He would fire a blank gun without warning to provoke genuine shock from the actors, capturing reactions that couldn't be rehearsed. In another instance, he went as far as striking a real priest moments before filming, determined to extract raw, unfiltered emotion. For a 13-year-old like Linda Blair, this environment was not just challenging. It was overwhelming, setting the stage for an experience that would leave a lasting mark long after the cameras stopped rolling. To make the possession feel disturbingly real in The Exorcist, the production pushed its environment to extremes. The bedroom set, where many of the most infamous scenes took place, was kept at near-freezing temperatures so the actor's breath would be visible on camera. Cast and crew endured hours in the cold day after day, as filming stretched on for months with grueling schedules and endless retakes. For Linda Blair, however, the toll went far beyond discomfort or fatigue. What began as a demanding role would soon leave a physical mark that she would carry long after the film was completed. One of the most harrowing moments came during a scene in which Linda was strapped to a mechanically rigged bed designed to thrash violently. The effect looked terrifying on screen, but behind the scenes it turned dangerous. The equipment malfunctioned, and the situation was not handled with the care it required. In the middle of a powerful jolt, the harness tightened abruptly, fracturing her lower spine. She was only a child, surrounded by adults focused on capturing the perfect shot. And perhaps the most unsettling detail of all, the filming did not stop. The cameras continued to roll, preserving a moment of real pain within a fictional nightmare. When The Exorcist finally premiered in December 1973, the response was immediate and overwhelming. This was not ordinary fear. It was something closer to collective shock. Across the United States, reports emerged of audience members fainting in their seats, becoming physically ill, or fleeing theaters in panic before the film even ended. The reaction grew so intense that Warner Brothers had to deploy off-duty police officers at certain screenings to manage the crowds. And at the center of this cultural phenomenon stood Linda Blair, just 14 years old, now known worldwide as the face of something audiences could not forget, no matter how hard they tried. At the heart of the phenomenon stood 14-year-old Linda Blair, whose performance in The Exorcist catapulted her into instant stardom. Almost overnight, she became one of Hollywood's most talked-about young talents. The role earned her a Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actress and an Academy Award nomination in the same category, placing her among the youngest nominees in Oscar history. Critics took notice as well. Film historian Mark Clark would later remark that Linda held her own alongside the seasoned Ellen Burstyn, matching her performance beat for beat in a film that demanded extraordinary emotional range. For a brief moment, it seemed as though Linda Blair's path was destined for greatness. The industry had opened its doors, and her future appeared limitless. She herself would later acknowledge that none of those opportunities would have existed without the platform the film provided. Yet beyond the fame, she expressed a deeper intention, hoping to use her life to leave a positive mark on the world. It was a grounded perspective, especially for someone who had been thrust so suddenly into global attention. But just as quickly as success arrived, complications followed. Questions began to surface, casting shadows over her achievements. One of the earliest controversies focused on her Oscar-nominated performance. Rumors spread that not every element of the role had been entirely her own. In particular, the chilling demonic voice that terrified audiences was revealed to have been performed by Mercedes McCambridge, who recorded the voice work in secrecy and, at first, received no on-screen credit. The revelation added a layer of debate to Linda's acclaim, raising uncomfortable questions about authorship, recognition, and how much of the performance truly belonged to the young actress at its center. When the Oscar nominations were announced, Mercedes McCambridge openly demanded recognition for her uncredited voice work in The Exorcist. The story quickly became fodder for tabloids, sparking debates about who truly deserved credit. To the public, the situation painted a messy picture. A 14-year-old Linda Blair appeared to have been celebrated for a performance that wasn't entirely her own, an impression that, fair or not, stuck in the popular imagination. Ultimately, the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences awarded the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress that year to Tatum O'Neal for her role in Paper Moon. For Linda, this was just a small consolation. At 14, she had already been thrust into the harsh glare of public scrutiny, forced to defend her talent amid controversy. But this was only the first of many challenges, a prelude to something far more unsettling. The cultural storm surrounding The Exorcist didn't end with the Oscars. The film's terror had seeped beyond theaters, leaving an indelible mark on audiences, some of whom could not separate fiction from reality. Soon, the Blair family began receiving death threats at their home, letters filled with genuine fear and accusations. Some of the writers seemed convinced that Linda herself was tied to real-life demonic forces, turning her childhood home in Westport into a place of unimaginable stress. At just 14 years old, she was facing a level of fear and hostility most adults could scarcely imagine, and the nightmare that had begun on screen was now spilling into her real life. The aftermath of The Exorcist extended far beyond the silver screen. The death threats that targeted 14-year-old Linda Blair, American actress, and her family were taken so seriously that Warner Brothers' unexpected ways. Hollywood quickly assigned her a type. Following the worldwide impact of The Exorcist, producers began to see Linda as the actress to call whenever a troubled or imperiled teenager was needed. Roles started to follow a pattern. Young characters facing intense crises, often under life-threatening circumstances. In 1974, she appeared in Airport 1975, portraying a kidney transplant patient on a plane confronting a mid-flight emergency, a part that reinforced the emerging typecasting that would follow her for years to come. In 1974, Linda Blair took on intense, challenging roles. After appearing in Airport 1975, she starred in the television film Born Innocent, portraying a 14-year-old girl repeatedly failed by her family and ultimately sent to a juvenile detention center. The film became the highest-rated TV movie of the year, and Linda's performance was widely praised for its emotional depth and authenticity. But one scene, a harrowing assault sequence, would ignite a controversy that far surpassed ordinary criticism. Shockingly, just days after the broadcast, a young girl in San Francisco was assaulted in a manner reportedly mirroring the scene from the film. The incident prompted a lawsuit against NBC and sparked a national debate about the influence of televised violence. In response, the network removed the controversial sequence from all future broadcasts, acknowledging the power and potential impact of what viewers saw on screen. At only 15 years old, Linda Blair once again found herself at the center of a major public controversy, this time in the realm of television rather than film. Despite the scrutiny and the pressure, her career pressed forward. In 1975, she took on another weighty role in the television film Sarah T. Portrait of a Teenage Alcoholic, portraying a teenage girl gradually descending into alcohol dependency. A story that reinforced her growing reputation as an actress willing to tackle difficult, socially relevant subjects. By the mid-1970s, Linda Blair was only 16, yet her on-screen captor, who eventually becomes a romantic interest, was Martin Sheen, 35 years old at the time. Around the same period, Blair's real-life choices sparked additional controversy. She began a relationship with Rick Springfield, who was 25 when they first met, while she was just 15. The intersection of her professional roles and personal life only heightened public scrutiny, painting a complex picture of a teenager navigating fame, typecasting, and circumstances far beyond her years. The relationship was not exactly hidden. Rick Springfield later wrote about it in his memoir Late at Night, and Linda Blair has spoken about it in interviews over the years. However, Entertainment Weekly later described Springfield's account of the relationship as unsettling. What made the situation even more surprising was that Blair's mother knew about the relationship and did not intervene. The relationship lasted for several years and even generated press coverage that portrayed it as a romantic story, rather than recognizing it as a deeply inappropriate situation involving someone so young. During her teenage years, Linda Blair was also involved in several relationships with men who were significantly older than she was. What is striking is that at the time, these situations drew little meaningful scrutiny from the public. In many ways, it reflected the environment she was working in. Before fame entered her life, Linda had a very different dream. She loved animals, had many of them, and once hoped to become a veterinarian. But everything changed quickly. In a very short time, she suddenly became widely famous after the success of The Exorcist. By 1977, Linda Blair of her life under the public spotlight. That year began with the production of the highly anticipated sequel to the film that had made her a household name, Exorcist II, The Heretic. On paper, the project seemed impressive. It was directed by John Boorman, an Academy Award-nominated filmmaker known for Deliverance, starred the legendary Richard Burton, and featured a record-breaking budget that made it the most expensive film Warner Brothers had ever produced at the time. Yet behind the scenes, chaos was brewing. Linda initially turned down the role, dissatisfied with the original script. She eventually agreed after a revised version was presented, only to discover that the script would continue to change repeatedly throughout production. By the time filming wrapped, the final product bore little resemblance to what she had originally signed on for, and bound by contract, she had no option to walk away. Years later, Blair would candidly describe the experience as a complete mess, reflecting both the disarray of the production and her personal frustration. When Exorcist II, The Heretic. During the tumultuous production of Exorcist II, The Heretic, Linda Blair her world. Her parents' marriage collapsed, ending in divorce, while her long-term relationship with Rick Springfield to attend the funerals of 3 members of Lynyrd Skynyrd, Ronnie Van Zant, Steve Gaines and Cassie Gaines, who had died in the tragic Lynyrd Skynyrd plane crash. While there, she met a man selling both pedigree puppies and cocaine. When she returned to purchase a puppy, she was pressured into buying cocaine as well, unwittingly inserting herself into a federal investigation. The man was under surveillance by the Drug Enforcement Administration, and Blair's involvement placed her at the center of a wiretap operation targeting a vast drug distribution network. The sweep ultimately led to the arrest of more than 30 individuals, part of a ring responsible for moving over $3 million worth of cocaine across state lines. Suddenly, at just 18 years old, Linda Blair, already battered by personal and professional struggles, found herself enmeshed in a legal nightmare that would become one of the darkest chapters in her life. Ultimately, Linda Blair, just 18 years old, Blair had endured a year that would have overwhelmed almost anyone. Her highly anticipated film, Exorcist II, The Heretic, had been ridiculed by critics. Her parents' marriage ended in divorce, she struggled with alcoholism, and she had lost friends in the tragic Lynyrd Skynyrd few could have imagined. Years later, in a 2001 interview with Lifetime, Blair reflected on that tumultuous period with remarkable candor. She described it as one of the most difficult years anyone could survive and credited herself simply for making it through, acknowledging how close she had come to losing everything. The arrest and its aftermath marked a definitive turning point, effectively closing the first chapter of Linda Blair's career and leaving her poised to rebuild her life and public image in the years that followed. After the upheaval of the drug scandal, Linda Blair 1978, Blair re-emerged on screen with the television film Stranger in Our House, directed by Wes Craven and also released as Summer of Fear, adapted from a novel by Lois Duncan. That same year, she starred in the Canadian feature Wild Horse Hank, portraying a college student determined to protect wild Mustangs from ruthless ranchers. These roles allowed Blair to reconnect with her passions and talents. With genuine equestrian skills, she brought authenticity to her performances, hinting at a career path that might have unfolded differently under more stable circumstances. In 1979, she embraced the spirit of the era with Roller Boogie, a musical set in the world of competitive roller skating, a colorful, light-hearted project that reflected the cultural trends of the late 1970s and offered a brief respite from the turbulence that had defined her early adult years. By the early 1980s, Linda Blair also attracted attention for posing nude in Playboy, further cementing her image as a daring and controversial figure. Despite, or perhaps because of her involvement in low-budget horror and exploitation films, Blair's performances were frequently singled out by the Golden Raspberry Awards, which recognized Hollywood's worst. She received 5 nominations and won twice. Yet over time, she developed a cult following among fans of genre cinema. Savage Streets, in particular, became a fan favorite. A TV Guide review even called Blair's work in the film her best performance since The Exorcist, though it added wryly that this was not exactly high praise. During this period, Blair's personal life also made headlines. She entered a relationship with Rick James, the flamboyant funk and R&B star. The two dated for roughly 2 years in the early 1980s, and James later recounted their time together in his memoir Glow, offering candid reflections on their unconventional romance. Through both her work and her private life, Blair maintained a presence in the public imagination, balancing notoriety, cult fame, and the continuing shadow of her early Hollywood years. During the 1980s, Linda Blair's life intersected with pop culture when Rick James 1976. She tested for the female lead in Taxi Driver, a part that ultimately went to Jodie Foster, who received an Academy Award nomination. In 1980, Blair auditioned for The Blue Lagoon, but the role went to Brooke Shields. These near misses hinted at the career she might have had under different circumstances, while also illustrating just how difficult it was for her to re-enter Hollywood's mainstream. By the late 1980s and into the 1990s, Blair's work shifted primarily to television movies and guest appearances, though she occasionally returned to feature films. One standout moment came in 1996 when Wes Craven, with whom she had collaborated on Stranger in Our House in 1978, cast her in a cameo for Scream as an obnoxious news reporter outside Woodsboro High School. Though brief, the appearance delighted audiences who recognized her. In 1997, Blair took a surprising turn onto Broadway, playing Betty Rizzo in a major revival of the musical Grease, successfully stepping outside the roles that had long defined her career. Then, in 2000, she became the host of the reality series Scariest Places on Earth, presenting 6 seasons as she explored allegedly haunted locations around the globe, a fitting return to the horror-adjacent legacy that had shaped her early fame. From 2000 to 2006, Linda Blair returned to the forefront of mainstream television as the host of Scariest Places on Earth. The series reintroduced her to audiences who had grown up with The Exorcist, a film that had left a lasting mark on horror fans worldwide. In 2006, she expanded her television presence with a guest role on Supernatural, portraying a detective who aids the Winchester brothers in an investigation. The role was written specifically for her, and notably avoided any supernatural or demonic elements, reflecting Blair's cautious approach to revisiting the horror legacy that had defined so much of her career. Years later, Blair continued to surprise audiences with playful and unexpected appearances. In 2022, she competed on Season 8 of The Masked Singer as the Scarecrow, delighting viewers with a light-hearted performance and introducing herself to a new generation, many of whom had never seen The Exorcist. In 2023, Blair returned to her cinematic roots with a cameo in The Exorcist. Believer, the legacy sequel to the iconic original. The appearance marked the first on-screen reunion with Ellen Burstyn since 1973. And though brief, it carried deep significance for fans and for Blair herself. Beyond her cameo, she served as a production advisor, guiding younger actresses through the psychological challenges of portraying possession. Director David Gordon Green later told Fandango that Blair's experience and mentorship had been invaluable, helping the new cast navigate the emotional intensity of the film while honoring the legacy that had shaped her career. Yet the defining chapter of Linda Blair far removed from Hollywood lights. It's been about animals. In 2004, she founded the non-profit Linda Blair World Heart Foundation, focused on rescuing and rehabilitating abused, neglected, and abandoned animals from the streets of Los Angeles as well as overcrowded city and county shelters. Operating from a 2-acre sanctuary in California, Blair dedicates herself full-time to the care of these animals, turning her passion into a lifelong mission. Her commitment became even more visible in 2005, after Hurricane Katrina devastated the Gulf Coast. Blair personally traveled to Mississippi to rescue 51 dogs left behind when their owners evacuated. Since its founding, the World Heart Foundation has saved more than 1,000 animals, earning Blair recognition from several animal welfare organizations, including PETA. She has invested much of her life savings into this work, demonstrating a devotion far beyond what her celebrity might suggest. In January 2025, Blair revealed that she is working on a memoir and expressed interest in returning to acting. Reflecting on her life from a distance, what stands out is the extraordinary youth at which so much happened. She was only 13 when she won the life-changing role in The Exorcist, 14 when the film premiered, 15 when bodyguards were required for her protection, and also 15 when she began a controversial relationship with a 25-year-old man. Her story is one of extreme highs and lows, but also of resilience and reinvention, ultimately defined by a profound commitment to the creatures she has spent decades saving. At 16, Linda Blair was already appearing in films alongside adult co-stars in situations that many later viewed as deeply inappropriate for someone so young. By 18, her world seemed to unravel in every direction at once. The entertainment industry of the 1970s offered very few safeguards for a teenager thrust into sudden fame. Studios, managers, and producers were often far more focused on what she could deliver for them than on what was actually happening to her behind the scenes. During those years, Linda Blair found herself involved in projects that placed her in compromising positions while she was still a minor. She was surrounded by adults who, in many ways, failed to behave responsibly. And when scandals or controversies erupted, it was her name that filled the headlines. It was her reputation and career that absorbed the damage, while many of the people who had guided those decisions remained largely untouched by the consequences. What she chose to build afterward tells a very different story. Through the creation of the Linda Blair World Heart Foundation, she dedicated decades to rescuing and protecting animals that had no one else to speak for them. The sanctuary she created became something deeply personal, an effort born entirely from her own choice. No studio cast her in that role. No contract promised it would improve her public image. She simply decided it was the work that mattered and devoted herself to it. When Today aired a segment about her organization titled From Devil to Angel, the phrase may have sounded dramatic, but the idea behind it captured something genuine about the path she ultimately chose. The ascent of Linda Blair, her life. To many, Blair will always be linked to a single role in The Exorcist, a performance that captured a moment of cinematic history. Yet her true story is far more complex. The years after the fame, the struggles, controversies, and ultimate reinvention arguably form the most compelling narrative of all. She was still a child when the world thrust enormous fame, expectations, and scrutiny upon her, things she could hardly have fully understood. Surrounded by adults often more invested in industry success than her well-being, Blair had to navigate a world moving far too quickly for someone her age. And yet, over time, she carved her own path. She stepped away from the chaos, built a life on her own terms, and devoted herself to work that truly mattered, like rescuing animals through the Linda Blair World Heart Foundation. This chapter of her life deserves as much recognition as the role that first made her a household name. If this glimpse into Linda Blair